Following Henry IV's assassination in 1610, Maria de' Medici became regent of France until the eldest of her three sons, Louis, was of age in 1614. At that time, the new king, Louis XIII, and his mother quarrelled bitterly, and she was banished to the provinces. They made their peace in 1620 at the Chateau in the Loire Valley, brought together by her advisor Bishop Lupin, who later became Cardinal Richelieu and the king's first minister. When she returned to Paris, Maria employed architect Salomon de Brozy, 1571 to 1626, to design and build the Palais de Luxembourg from 1615. De Brozy introduced the fully developed Italian Baroque style in architecture to France, which is distinguished by its grand manner, frequent use of classical order, not as the Greeks used it proportionately, but on a grand scale, meant to impress or overwhelm the onlooker, and an emphasis on progression and recession, which later architects would call movement in architecture. When Italian sculptor Bernini visited Paris later in the century, he declared the Luxembourg the finest thing he had yet seen in France. De Brozy had a predilection for rotundas, and the one at the Luxembourg is inspired by Donato Bramante's Tiempetta at Rome. The Luxembourg consisted of two wings and a screen around a court, with pavilions disposed at the corners of its main block. Each pavilion contained a complete apartment on every floor, which consisted of a large room, two smaller ones, and a closet, approached through a vestibule. The interiors became noteworthy when Maria de' Medici charged Flemish painter Peter Paul Rubens, 1577 to 1640, in January 1622, to complete a great commission of paintings, to decorate the long, narrow galleries that ran the length of the first floor in each wing. She insisted they were to be completed in his own hand, as distinguished from those artists in Europe at the time, whose workshop filled in the details, while the artist attended to only the face and hands. One cycle was to illustrate events from her life, the other that of her late husband, Henry IV the Great. Only the cycle about her life was ever completed, due to continual rows with her son Louis XIII and his advisers, who were unhappy a French artist had not gained the commission. The Queen and Richelieu were more than satisfied with the 21 delivered, which present Maria as a queen triumphant. It is recorded words failed her when she saw them, and she regarded Rubens as the first man in the world in his profession. Even the dispassionate Richelieu could but only look at them and admire them. At this time, European manners, if we compare them by the standards of our own day, even among the ruling classes, were still exceedingly rough. In France, the responsibility for the establishment of what we would consider polite behaviour has been attributed to the Marquis de Rambouillet, 1588 to 1665. She belonged to one of the noble families of Rome, her father a former French ambassador. She came to Paris when her husband was appointed Master of the King's Wardrobe. Taking up a central role in Parisian cultural life, she remodelled her father's old house, the Hotel Lambert, in 1619, and held literary soirees. We are told that the rooms were spacious, well proportioned, aimed at convenience, comfort, and harmony. It is recorded that the woodwork was painted blue, the walls were covered in blue material, as were the chair covers and other textile components. This unified interior became known as the Salon Bleu. By arranging her apartments for her own convenience, rather than as an accepted convention, the Marquise displayed an independence of mind that was quite remarkable for that time, especially in a woman. Maria de Medici heard about the Marquise when making her own arrangements for the Luxembourg, and so she sent her designers to view the apartments. The Marquise was well attuned to refined Italian manners and taste, and she set about influencing her peers, banning those who did not comply with such rules as not spitting on the floor but in the spittoon, for farting or burping loudly, etc., and she brought about a pattern for elegant living which quickly spread throughout the beau monde, ultimately influencing all the society of Europe. It was all about what was acceptable social behaviour. The engraver Abraham Bosey, 1602 to 76, transmitted taste through charming views of the Parisian haute bourgeoisie going about their daily lives. Important rooms were paved with marble for grand effect, and floors with wide European oak boards that were random nailed gave way to a new style of floor originating in Italy. Made of small bricks of timber, the French improved techniques and produced patterns for parquetry in principal rooms. The floor of the luxurious closet, belonging to the famous General Condé at the height of his career, was recorded in 1668. It's composed of several kinds of timber outlined with pewter. On the richly decorated reading desk, the table carpet is of silk brocade with gold threads, and he's seated on a splendid gilded throne-like chair with a footstool, raising his feet above all others, confirming his notorious reputation for arrogance. French architecture of the period was mostly the creation of three men: Jacques Le Mercier, 1585 to 1654; Francois Manso, 1598 to 1666, and Louis Lavo, 1612 to 1670. Le Mercier built the Sorbonne, the historical house of the former University of Paris, from 1626, and he enlarged the Hotel Lambert, previously built by Salomon de Beausy. He also built the Palais Cardinal, later called the Palais Royal, in 1633, and was involved in the building of three great Parisian churches, other regional chateaux and churches, with his most important royal commission to complete the square court of the Louvre. Francois Manso, 1598 to 1666, was apprenticed to architect Salomon de Beausy, who brought a genuinely French tradition of architecture to a high level of perfection. We know little about his life, except that he was born at Paris and by the age of 23 was well established as an architect. He completed works for the king's brother, designed notable churches, and built numerous private houses at Paris. His works combined clarity with subtlety and restraint with richness, and he changed the direction of French architectural style with his design for the Chateau de Balleroy at Bayeux in Normandy. Its high-pitched roofs not only repelled the snow, but also complemented the red brick offset with fine sandstone. Its configuration led eloquence and grandeur to its mass, and it was cleverly sited on rising ground. The village that serviced it was moved and rebuilt to flank the approach to it. The Chateau de Balleroy has an outstanding forecourt, surrounded by a low terrace on which stand two small pavilions, the court raised above the approach, from which it is reached by a flight of steps. This staircase is repeated in three other oval flights, so the chateau seems to tower over the visitor arriving from the village and crossing the moat, reinforcing the position of power of the owner. Manso also built the Château de Masson near Paris between 1630 and 1642, where he used classical orders in a triumphal entrance. Inside, he designed a circular room using large quantities of plate glass that made those who entered gasp in delight. It was considered revolutionary in its time, and Manso was one of the most accomplished architects of his generation. Louis Lavo, 1612 to 1670, guided a talented team of craftsmen, painters, sculptors, stucco workers, gilders, and so forth, who all combined to produce effects which came nearer to the Italian Baroque style than any other. Born at Paris, throughout his long career, Louis DeVoe successfully collaborated with Charles Lebrun, 1619 to 1690, who provided his exteriors with interior design and decoration. In 1632, they both came to the attention of all the nobility when they built one of Paris's most beautiful townhouses, the Hotel Lambert, for financier Jean-Baptiste Lambert. The site for the hotel was curious in shape, and Lavo made brilliant use of its possibilities. The entrance from the street led to a court, of which the curved end facing the visitor contains the staircase, conceived on almost theatrical principles and divided into 2 flights. As the visitor ascended, the effect was that of emerging from a dark tunnel into a well-lit open space 3 times the width of the flight. The works, executed by Lavo and Lebrun, aided by assistant Eustache Lasieux at the Hotel Lambert, became a legend at once. While we know that in the Middle Ages bed coverings and wall hangings were often made of the same fabric in noble households, as a general rule, uniformity in interiors was not more general in Europe until after 1625. At the Hotel Lambert, Louis Lavo and Charles Lebrun had demonstrated how satisfactory a fully unified concept could be. But as there are few interiors at Paris that have survived changing fashion, as well as the late 18th century Revolution, they are almost impossible to view, except at the Lambert, where the Gallery of Hercules was still in place as of 2007. 23 metres long and 7 metres wide, its ceiling was divided into 5 compositions depicting stories of the heroes of antiquity. The Hotel Lambert at Paris was another building that the duo completed in 1656-7, some decor of which is still intact. What is there literally drips with gold, embellishing the carved door cases and other fixed features. This is a good place to make a point about gilding in interiors during the 17th and 18th centuries in France, England, and the rest of Europe. It was not just about a display of wealth. Having proved it successfully reflected candlelight, like mirror plate, it made life after dark more bearable. In northern climes where it was dark for most of the year longer than it was light, it was a big issue, so if you could afford it, you used it lavishly. In France, the period of Anne of Austria's regency was to end spectacularly, with the downfall of one of the greatest of all its art patrons, Nicolas Bouquet. Bouquet was a member of a bourgeois family who had climbed the social ladder to success. His first wife had died after 1 year of marriage, leaving him a dowry that enabled him to purchase an old chateau and the land around it, with the aim of establishing a sizable estate for his second wife and family. In 1650, he also brought an office at the Parliament, possible at that time, making him the King's representative at the High Court, and in 1653 he was appointed Superintendent of Finances to the King. Nicolas Bouquet belonged to the generation of the 3 talented men he employed to create a home in the Ile-de-France. They were the dynamic duo, architect Louis Lavo, 1612 to 1670, designer Charles Lebrun, 1619 to 1690, Together with gardener André Lynott, 1613 to 1700, they would become a triumphant triumvirate. It took 5 years to build La Chateau, Vaux le Vicomte, designed by 3 for the glory of 1, and it was there that the French classical style was born. Sited halfway between the royal summer houses of Vincennes and Fontainebleau, Fouquet created a built environment in which all the arts contributed harmoniously to its overall beauty. Here, at last, was the perfect chateau. Imposing, but not huge, set among gardens where water basins, fountains, cascades, and acres of flowers delighted the eye. Completely comfortable, convenient, and splendid inside. Intimate rooms with painted and polished wood panelling, colourful carpets, sensational ceilings, carved and gilded furniture. It was the jewel box, containing all the jewels, and it had, and still has today, in its stunning setting, a huge emotional and physical impact for any visitor. One could say that Vaux le Vicomte was built for the enjoyment of the countryside while not giving up any of the pleasures of the city, a combination of grandeur and civilization in which the art of conversation was practiced well. Fouquet intended it to be the greatest art centre of his world, and 900 men each day worked on the site from his personal instructions. Vaux had a compact ground plan, with the main building standing on a rectangular platform bounded by moats filled with water. There are 4 terrace landings to ascend to reach the main entrance, ensuring an uplifting emotion of greatness as you approach. This deliberate design effect had been used by both de Brosy at the Luxembourg and Mansart at Balleroy in Normandy. It was the French Baroque style at its best, and a high standard of both design and workmanship was achieved. The chateau is 2 rooms deep, which was a change from the conventional 1 room, and its twin pavilions were now part of an architectural French tradition in which the central block also had a semi-engaged rotunda on the garden side. The decorative program for this room was one of the most important in French art, although it was never fully completed. It is entirely Lebrun's work, and a whole repertoire of symbols transform this large hallway into one of the most brilliant rooms in French Baroque architecture. Lebrun supplied drawings for both painted and sculpted decoration, which were unprecedented in the history of French art until this time. He surrounded the level of the salon, that corresponds with the first floor of the chateau, with 16 sheathed figures bearing an emblem in the form of a medallion, on which the figures of the zodiac and seasons can be identified. The room itself acted as an amphitheatre between the house and the garden, because when it was conceived, it was completely open to the natural elements, where the great spectacle of nature unfolded. Lavo and Lebrun fully expressed the social status and or aspirations of the occupant, the intention being to depict the palace of the sun as described by the ancient Latin poet Ovid. The coving and ceiling have been described as masterpieces of French painting in the Italian style, as it was from ancient Rome the model for elevated ceilings came. In the dining room, Charles Lebrun reveals himself as a painter of consummate skill. On the coffered ceiling, the central image is peace, bringing abundance, which alludes to the 1659 Treaty of the Pyrenees with Spain. It was during the mid-17th century in Europe that a room was set aside for meals, Up until then, they had been taken at occasional tables in antechambers of bedrooms or the salon. At that same time, a change occurred in the use of chinaware and cutlery. Fouquet certainly would have eaten his meat with a fork, without fearing an accusation of depravity, which was still associated with that practice just a few years earlier. It seems Fouquet owned 500 dozen dinner plates and a full service of gold. Off the dining room was a separate small room, referred to in his inventories as a buffet or serving area, where he housed an outstanding collection of porcelains. Fouquet's bedroom overlooked the courtyard. The walls were panelled to the height of the chair rail, with tapestries above depicting the story of Vulcan, commissioned from an English tapestry works. If we stand in the Salon de Hercule, we can see 3 rooms, the antechamber, the main room and study that formed the nucleus of Fouquet's apartment. The progression through rooms to an ultimate destination was one of the most important issues in architecture of the 17th century. Noblemen wanted a layout personalised to accommodate the rituals integral to their daily life. The gardens at Vaux are the first example of what is now known as the Garden à la Française. Restored at the end of the 19th century, they were described by publisher Charles de Courcy in 1652 as the place where Fouquet made art and nature engage in a pleasant contest, and added, every day, new beauties and new embellishments. The third generation of his family to become a royal gardener, André Lynott, perfected a French version of the classical garden style. His genius lay in bringing together a design repertoire already known in a strictly controlled, harmonious form, and he became a legend in France during his lifetime. Contemporary descriptions characterize Lynott as exceedingly witty, and he was much admired for his vivacity, exuberance, and enthusiasm. He began with spade and hoe, developing his abilities until he designed the finest parks in Europe, acquiring great wealth and one of the finest art collections in France. Throughout his long life and career of 81 years, Lynott would complete about 100 gardens. As his fame grew, everyone in France and some abroad wanted a garden by Lynott. For each client he devised some original feature, reflecting the character of its owner, well suited to its location and in harmony with the house around it. Lynott never expressed his ideas on garden planning in writing. His style has been interpreted by modern scholars from plans and the remains of the gardens themselves. At Vaux, he achieved a synthesis of harmony of house and land as a single unit. It was like a wonderful piece of music played by an orchestra where all the instruments come together in triumph. The sounds of hundreds of fountains could be heard as they dripped from shells and masks and soared high into the air with a great rush, curving in great arcs of crystal, shot through with all the colours of the rainbow. Brightly coloured flowers hung over the sides of handsome vases, which were raised on pedestals and stood along the rims of reflection pools. Hornbeam hedges were clipped almost as smooth as walls of masonry, and the topiary of box and yew stood out in dark green hues and wonderful shapes. True to a classical scheme, the central axis of the garden led straight out across an ornamented moat and down steps dividing the garden into 2. It then crossed 3 levels that sloped gently from the house to the river. Just as Fouquet was finishing Vaux le Vicomte in the year 1660, Cardinal Mazarin, who had controlled Louis XIV's fortunes since early childhood, died. Louis was 22 years of age, and he both surprised and amused his courtiers by announcing he would not take another first minister, but complete control himself, declaring, "L'État, c'est moi. I am the state." On August the 17th, 1661, Fouquet gave a great party to honour the king, inviting thousands of guests to see his newly completed estate. The entertainment by actor and playwright Molière was a first in France, a play that incorporated a ballet, and this was to be followed by a firework display. Prior to the evening entertainment, in the afternoon, André Lynott guided the king around the garden. The king, with his long gold-topped walking stick and on his high red heel shoes, progressed for over 2 miles without saying one word. This momentous walk was a pivotal point for France and the garden art of the world, a walk during which a king would be inspired to plan a park and palace to surpass what he was seeing. He listened and absorbed all that he was told about the principles behind the design that Lynott had employed. Behind them, all the other guests promenaded, clad like colourful butterflies, because Louis did not permit anyone to wear black or dark colours at court. The park at Vaux appeared smaller than it was. The effect was not one of vastness, but of an inviting series of features. One exit opened into an entrance to the next, all handled skillfully. The visitor was propelled forward, anxious to explore further, unconsciously directed where to go, without having to think about it. Lynott explained how all terraces had been sloped for drainage, and how he had achieved an effect that in practice made them appear level. The central terrace was higher and more accentuated than the ones on either side, and after they had gone some distance, the king was able to look back and notice that while the foreground was always receding, the chateau still appeared to be at the same distance from the observer. This brilliant effect was achieved by using transverse axes made of water. The refraction of light off the glittering surface brought about a foreshortening of perspective, and the sheer genius of its mathematics could not have failed to impress Louis. Fill the air with cries in your deep grottos, weep, nymphs of Vaux, enlarge your waves, and may the swollen anquil ravage the treasures with which the gaze of Flora has beautified its banks. On the terrace stood Hercules with his club, the vista as controlled as is every aspect of the garden's design. When they reached the end of their journey, the king turned to his host, Bouquet, and said, "I am surprised." And Fouquet answered, "Sire, I am surprised at your surprise." Louis had taken all of this display of grandeur in his stride, but became quietly enraged as gifts of diamond tiaras and saddle horses were distributed to the guests. On September the 5th, 1661, the famous fourth musketeer d'Artagnan, under orders from Louis XIV, arrested Fouquet, suspected of misappropriating royal funds. Louis' was a particularly brutal response to Fouquet's motto, "To what heights won't he climb?" Vaux le Vicomte was confiscated. The crown requisitioned the furniture, valuable objects, and tapestries, including over 1,000 orange trees, of which the king was passionately fond. Throughout his life they decorated his rooms in silver tubs, and 8 of them still exist at Versailles today. Louis was not a vindictive man. Fouquet's children had the chateau restored to them 12 years later. Fouquet died in prison in 1680, the sympathies of the French people on his side, and his guilt or innocence is still debated today. The subjection of French art to the influence of Rome was proclaimed at Vaux le Vicomte. The house and garden are a true Roman story. The orange and lemon trees came from Rome, The Tiber is featured in its gardens, the composition inspired by Roman architectural principles. The same is true of the house, and Bernini himself approved of Charles Le Brun's scheme for the cupola of the salon by saying, "It is beautiful. It has abundance without confusion." And now it's time to take a break until part 2 of the Dream Team.